Hi, everybody. This is Brett Gordon and Brandon Croucher for One Square at a Time, a show where we're really trying to bring out the superhero powers or superpowers of everybody through the lives and characters of the superheroes that we see on TV. With that information, we are hoping that it's valuable to your life and the lives of those around you. And Brandon, let me turn it over to you for any additional introductory comments.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really am grateful to be here with everyone today. We are actually not doing a superhero today. We're doing a villain. And I personally think it's pretty fascinating, this villain. And I'm excited that Brett and I get to do this and have a conversation. We are about being able to really build you up and let you see how you can connect and find your superpower and be able to be the best leader you can with the proper tools. So Brett, it is such a great honor to be here. Brett's company is, I went to open it up behind here, and the email that I had it on, I can't see right this second, and I wanted to cheat and be able to say it. Brett, say the name of your company so I don't screw it up.
Businesses are people too.
And I had people are businesses too, so I'm glad I had you.
Yeah, just the opposite. That's what I'm trying to bring out. Just the opposite, that businesses are nothing but people when you get down to the core.
Correct. So today's episode is about the Joker. Growing up, I had Jack Nicklaus as the Joker. Nicholson. Thank you. And then the one that was the older one, the original Joker, what was his name?
Cesar Romero.
See, I'll get the other two. I know them. They're in my age bracket a lot more. We have Joaquin Phoenix, and I cannot think. I just blanked, and I'm the one that said it before. Heath Ledger.
Correct.
We have Heath Ledger, Joaquin Phoenix, and all these guys, and they all played the same character. What's interesting about that is how different they interpreted the role of that character. It's pretty fascinating. So Brett, I can talk all day about the Joker. I think he's one of my favorites. I think it's an interesting thing. I think even I went back and looked up stuff about the comic books because I was curious how the Joker came about. And it's interesting how the comic books give you a couple different versions. Did you know that in one comic book, more modern ones, the Joker just came about? He had one bad day and he was the Joker then. Where the older ones, it shows that he was built into it. And it's not just one day. He had a system of things go wrong, and he had things keep breaking, and his life keep changing. And he became a product of a broken society, as seen in the most recent one with Joaquin Phoenix, and why he became the evil inside him. For me, it's a very interesting story because you can think that he's playful, like Jack Nicholson. You can think that he's more serious and more angry, as Heath Ledger was. Or you could think he's more crazy, like the other guy. At the end of the day, Joaquin Phoenix took all of them and brought them into that last role, and it showed how he became. And I thought that was my favorite of all the Jokers because and a lot of people would disagree. They think Heath Ledger's the best. But I personally think that he hits the role in such a way that he incorporated all of these actors to bring it into why the Joker became the Joker. And that is why I truly enjoyed this movie. What were your opinions?
I grew up watching Cesar Romero in the original Batman series, live series on TV, and he was maniacal but funny in there to a certain degree, and you can see even in his picture here, the eyes. He played that role very well, I think, for the time, and again, kind of like we talked about, beauty is in the eye of the beholder at that moment. Well, I think that each one of these actors actually took kind of the moment in time that they played the character and incorporated into the character challenges of that time. So, they don't really go into a whole lot of background on how the Joker became the Joker so much in the original Batman series. But if you take a look at what happened with Jack Nicholson, actually Jack Nicholson was a crook, a criminal before he became the Joker. And actually it was through actually being set up by his old mob boss that he ended up getting dropped or sprayed with a toxic chemical and then dropped into a vat of it, which then deformed his face and brought him into his new life. In fact, he kind of says, my life as I think it was Jack Napier was dead and the Joker came alive.
Oh, that's interesting.
So he really, and that came out in, I think, some discussion with either Bruce Wayne or Batman later in the movie, where he basically was saying, that when he mentioned Jack Napier, he's like, that guy's dead. So that was an interesting way. And, this is back in the 80s. And they were really talking about, the mob and how, crime, organized crime. And actually, toward the end of the movie is when you find out that Jack Napier was the murderer of Bruce Wayne's parents. So that
was in the one with
Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, that's the one from Nicholson, the movie of that one, because that's not how it connects with the most recent one, which is fascinating. Go ahead with your point, and we'll come back to that. Sorry.
So there's two of the characters, or two of the actors, and ways that they represented the character. Then comes along Heath Ledger, and that was super intense as to how he really became the Joker and the deformity that he had in his face. And actually, he had a couple of different stories that he told about how he got the scars in his face.
Mm-hmm.
And one was that it was his mother's boyfriend that was actually took a knife and cut his face open and said, we want you to be just a big smile, and cut him open. But then, later on in the movie, he comes out and he says, no, that's not it. I was so much in love with my girlfriend, and she got scars on her face, and then he took a razor blade and did it himself.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not sure exactly how he got what he got, but it definitely was some sort of very, very traumatic experience. And going back, all the way to potentially his childhood.
Do you think maybe it could even be about the fact that he did not it shows the illness that he had? Like he's the bad guy. He can't keep track of what really happened, and he puts things in his head to actually think that happened to him, and it keeps him in that mindset. Do you think that's a possibility for the Joker?
Absolutely. I think that, one of the kind of where I think their superpower is ties into just that concept.
Mm-hmm.
So going into just the last role of how Joaquin Phoenix played him, he really brought in, the challenges that we are recognizing more and more today, especially through even things like PTSD and so forth. The whole concept of how, things in the past, things that you may not even know of,
mm-hmm.
dramatically are dramatically affecting your life today. And until you can kind of bring those out and recognize those, it's always impacting your life, but you may not know how or why. And, in his case, after his mother was in the hospital, he began to hear stories. Well, actually, just before that, his mother wrote a letter to what she was portraying as his father, which was Thomas Wayne, or Bruce Wayne's father.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the letter said, when I worked for you, we had this child and this child together, and now I'm dying, and I want you to basically look over him. And that's what Arthur, so the Joker in this one, his name was Arthur. So Arthur believed that this rich man, who was ultimately going to be like the mayor of Gotham City, was his father, and that Bruce Wayne was his half brother. Then when he went over there, he found out from Alfred that, Alfred told him, your mother was mentally ill and this is not really true. So he went back to the mental hospital that she was in and got the records, actually stole the records. And when he was reading the records, in those, it indicated that no, he was actually adopted by his mother, and that when they found him or found her, he had been abused by her boyfriend and was bruised and scarred and actually tied to a radiator and malnourished. So this is a whole thing that he did not know at all about his background, if in fact it was true. And there's always this question mark as to which story was true. There was never really a confirmation of either one, because it's kind of he versus, the rich man. Did the rich man actually create these records to actually have, this child born out of wedlock not associated with him? Or was this really a woman that had psychological problems and a boyfriend that really abused him, and that basically set the foundation of his life, of which he did not even recognize? And in fact, he had head trauma, severe head trauma, when they found him. So there may have been not only just a psychological impact, but a real physical impact to his brain that kind of twisted reality or made him depressed. And so I think that, each one of the characters kind of represented the Joker in a way that was somewhat more toward their time in the actual history of the world. And very, very interesting.
So I gotta ask, just because. So I don't know Caesar salad very well. I can't say what his is. Caesar Ramon, is that what you said?
Romero.
He has two salad names?
Yeah, Romain Romero.
So I can't speak clear enough on that one to be able to have an opinion that wouldn't sound distorted by not knowing the answers. But Jack Nicholson, Nicholson,
you're right.
It is Nicholas. Jack Nicholas is the golfer.
Yes.
I've done that my whole life. Jack Nicholson, I'm sorry. So he plays the Joker. And while what we're talking about here, you can see how I was trying to look at Joaquin Phoenix and like 18 emails just came in. You could see how Joaquin Phoenix's story was developed and how it influenced one to another and all that. And I agree. But with Jack Nicholson, and you're saying in time of when the movie was made, that movie was made in 93, I believe it was.
I think it was actually toward the latter part of the 80s, but close enough.
Okay. I was going to Google it really quick, but like, how do you see that connecting with what was going on at that time frame for that Joker to match the evil? Just curious. And then I'm going to do the same with Heath Ledger.
Well, we've had a history in the United States, especially in New York and so forth, of big crime mob bosses and things like that. Jimmy Hoffa and so forth was actually not that far off of the time of when they were creating the film or making the film, the Joker or Batman at that time. And yes, it's set in a time before the 1980s, but the mob was definitely a part of New York, and it was also something that was somewhat current in terms of how the mob was operating, even, like I said, with the Jimmy Hoffa era,
Mhm.
really just about there. So I'm just drawing that out. I'm not saying that that had anything to really do with it in terms of how Jack Nicholson played the character or how they wrote that character, but I'm just thinking that there was something there that was, as we get into the 2000s, you don't hear about the mob and stuff the way that you did back in the 80s. So I'm just kind of playing it out in that in kind of my mind as to some of the current events of the times in which these characters were actually portrayed in the movie.
So, with Jack Nicholson, I mean, by the way, it's 1989, his movie, the one he was in. You were correct. I went and looked it up. It's in that time frame. Now, don't get me wrong. You're going to hate me for doing this. I was only 6, but 1989, for that movie, he played kind of a darker role for that. Like, he was scary. He was in an art museum. He's painting on the walls. He's destroying things. And as a kid, you're like, no, you're not supposed to do that. I'm the kid that got in trouble at the art museum for sitting on the thing that I thought was a toilet that apparently isn't. So, like, my thing is, you got to be able to, he played that role in a time that they made it dark, but today when you watch it, I don't think you'd view it as that dark. I think people would view it as just an older movie. And for that time frame, even that picture you have is perfect because his eyes show the crazy that was in his eyes in that movie. For people, that was something where mental illness wasn't discussed. Pain for that wasn't discussed. And in that time frame, him falling into that vat of chemicals, it changed him, and how we are as a society, it judged him, and he felt that, and that's where his anger started to feed from. And I think that's interesting because then you go to Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger's character with it was more psychotic in a sense. Like, he was more psychotic's not the right word. It's not at all. He was more driven towards pain, fear. He blows up a hospital. He steals buses. He is not afraid to walk in the middle of a street with a bazooka. And that was something that in our time, like for that movie's time frame, my age bracket, that was a little more dark for movies that were coming out. It was especially his smile. It was meant to connect with people in a different way. And now you get into Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix's character was completely taking all of those and like draining it down into him. And I think that he nails it, but a lot of people called that second movie, or the Joker one, the most recent one, a trigger movie, meaning it connects with people through all of these different ones, and it triggers stuff in people to be able to start having reactions. And I don't really feel like that movie did that. I think it showed a side of society that a lot of people choose to ignore, and how certain people become who they become.
Well, I think, and I guess it all kind of depends on, how you define that trigger concept, because different people look at movies just like they look at events with their own perception in mind. And did it trigger in them kind of the way that they feel things have been happening in terms of the treatment of the mentally ill,
Mm-hmm.
or people that have challenges due to childhood events. And I think that those things, like you mentioned, have been coming out more and more and more. And the concept of PTSD growing from, kind of where it was originally, I think, brought out more or less from military backgrounds and the stuff that they saw in there. And then it's been expanded to incorporate, any kind of traumatic event that people can have in their lives. And there's been an opening in terms of recognition and being able to openly talk about those things. So if that's kind of the trigger that they're talking about, or another opportunity to make mental illness not something to hide but to actually bring out so that you recognize that people are experiencing these, then maybe it's a trigger event. I don't know. That's just my take on it.
I agree with you. I think a lot of people they let movies influence them too much. They let movies, like when I watched Aladdin as a kid, I thought I was going to marry the Princess of Ohio at one point, and I was a kid. Like, that was a goal of mine. My mom still makes jokes about it. Oh, did you find your Princess of Ohio? And I'm like, she hasn't been voted in yet, Mom. Just wait, okay? But for real, it's one of those things where I think that people look at these things and when you hear the Joker going from Caesar salad all the way down to Joaquin Phoenix, like, that character depicts negativity in a lot of people's minds right away. That's the first thing they hear of. It's bad guy. It's this. Yeah. And I think that was the trigger for people, is a lot of people related to the Joker. A lot of people. And it's the Heath Ledger one. Heath Ledger took that role and showed what a mental illness looks like. It got to him. And to the point that we all know what happened to him, and God rest his soul, but like, Heath Ledger took that, and people don't catch the licking of the lips, and him walking, his mannerisms, his eyes are blank at parts in the movie when something critical is happening, which is a sign of somebody that's not there. They're overtaken. And for mental illness, that usually means their mind is gone somewhere else. For this movie, a lot of people, especially because that was 2008, I just Googled it. And when that came about in 2008, that was something we're just starting to hear about mental illness. And I think when I say triggered, I use that as a word that was discussed when I saw the original Joker. It's because people related to him in the 2008 one. And then by the time the movies kept coming, by the time the Joker actually came, people felt like this shows why they're the Joker. And a lot of people were afraid that it was going to be an influence into going and rioting, going and doing these things, which we have anyways now, you know?
Hey, when I was growing up and stuff, they were saying that Ozzy Osbourne did the same thing in his music, and that all the kids listening to his music were going to become, distorted in their mind and biting the heads off of bats and all that stuff. So I think that, oftentimes it's also a scapegoat as opposed to anything else. They see these movies, they see these characters, and rather than taking responsibility for themselves or possibly the way that they're raising their children or interfacing with other people, they're blaming it on a character or a scene or the way that a movie represents a certain type of person.
Correct.
So you're absolutely right. Most people, and I do believe this is true, I even talked to my dad the other night, and I was trying to bring something to his attention about the way So he was going to play cards with my mom, and then my mom said, move the table. And my dad was moving the table. And while he was doing that, he ended up breaking a bottle of wine on the floor. And the next thing I hear is he's blaming my mom for breaking the bottle of wine on. And I'm like, no, you did that. And he's ranting and raving, and I'm like, no, Dad, you did that. Yes, she asked you to move it. Maybe you didn't want to move it, but the fact that the bottle broke was not her fault. It was yours. And he's like, but it's a lot easier to blame her. I'm like, yeah, okay.
If that's how it works, my God, no wonder my ex-wife and I didn't get along. I kept blaming her for everything. She didn't want to accept the blame,
So and I think that the whole concept of mental illness has a spectrum. It's not a black and white thing. It's not a if and or thing. And as a matter of fact, I would venture to say that everybody's got some level of a mental illness. I'm not going to say I know everybody has some sort of a mental difference or illness. And it all depends on how they're dealing with it and how they're viewing with it. But oftentimes you will see, and I do believe this as well, that everybody does have multiple personalities. It all depends on the situation and how we are choosing to control those things as to, whether or not people think you have one or whether or not people tell you have one. So
And I think being a person who I have severe anxiety, depression, high anxiety, bouts of anxiety, and I suffer from bipolar 2 disorder. Do you know what that is?
I don't know what bipolar 2 versus 1 or
So
anything like that. So
it's actually pretty interesting. I'll make it very simple. So you have your normal line of where everybody functions, like they have their highs and their lows and all that. A bipolar person goes extremely high and extremely low, and you don't know which side you're going to get in between. And it could be a couple days, weeks, months, years. Bipolar 2, you never get those highs. So you get a little high, like of good things, and then you drop. And when you drop as far as a depressed person. Bipolar 2 is actually the higher suicide rate. And it's just because they don't ever feel the joy that they can, no matter how much they tell themselves. I have a gratitude journal. I lay down at night and say things I'm thankful for. I talk about positivity all the time. But when I turn this computer off in my head, I'm thinking I failed at this. I did this. I fucked up this. I did that. And no matter how hard I fight it, it still comes. And then I try to rephrase the words. So understanding that when you hear the word mental illness, it's like somebody having a diagnosis of a disease. That doesn't mean that they're not still them. It means that sometimes the medicine or the disease might be hurting them in that moment. And that's why we are supposed to love one another and all that. With the Joker, you have a tipping point where you break from being good or bad. And he kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until he just was like, all right, I'm the bad guy. And he got tired of it and he did his thing. Sorry, go ahead. I was picturing all these things with this, and you and I are having a good conversation.
No, I think this is awesome. The conversation that we're having. I also think that, it's amazing that you're able to talk about your situation from a firsthand perspective and do that with confidence and not be afraid to do that. And I think that that's also, how and why you've got this driver for creating the Light Cafe and everything else. It's really a way to be able to help people that, and everybody can use help. Everybody. So, whether or not you have bipolar 2 or you have something else or you are normal, you still need help.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
and what your normal is might be different from my normal, and what my normal is could be completely different from somebody else.
Well, just look at the differences in our personalities. You can see it as it comes through in the screen. I'm more, if you want to call it,
reserved.
And that was just something that I grew up to be, and it's kind of really part of my profile and the business in the profiling system I use to start off my business discussions or my working with individuals and entrepreneurs. In yours, you are more of a creative type. So you are more about, having this kind of energy and ideas and things along those lines. So everybody has a place in life, and everybody has a way that they express their inner core energy in different ways. And that's not to say that, somebody who's a creator couldn't be much more reserved. And you do see those types of things. Even, if you look at Steve Jobs, he was very creative and powerful person, but he wasn't, at least on stage, he appeared more reserved.
Yes.
But in the back office, and when things went nuts or didn't go the way he wanted to, he wasn't as reserved either. So again, your personalities come out based on the situations that you're in. And do I get more animated at times? Absolutely. But I think that this is really interesting, because if you were to kind of look at, the 4 different Jokers that we have here behind me on a spectrum, you would put them in a different place on a spectrum of mental health, mental wellness, mental illness. As I'm now really kind of calling mental wellness, it's melness, and it's something that people have to actively work on. The challenge when sometimes you have a mental difference, you don't necessarily know that or recognize it, or if you do, oftentimes you blame it as opposed to take responsibility for it. And I think that, you see these characters and they kind of progressed into a point from where they were kind of except for maybe they started off as a normal person and
Yes.
then progressed to where they were. And here's something, and it was interesting when you're describing it, because I was trying to identify kind of the superpower, because everybody, as I mentioned, have superpowers, whether you're a superhero, a supervillain. And guess what? Supervillains to some people are superheroes.
Yeah, 100% yes.
So what I found in all of these characters is they were highly intelligent, but like hyper aware or hyper observant of what was going on around them. And in fact, hyper observant to the point that they could perceive things, the events that they saw, they or perceived, were in a level of detail that most people don't see them.
I agree. I could see that. What tool would that be, though? How do you see? Like, that's almost like a telescope, but like,
Or a magnifying glass.
Yes, good point. A magnifying. Oh, that's where you're gonna go. I see it now.
So what happens, and this is the difference between normal and illness oftentimes, is how your brain or mind filters all of the stimulus that is around you.
Yeah, 100% yes.
And as you start to have more and more of the stimuli affecting you or coming into you without filters or without clumping them together in a way that your mind can actually process them, it starts to become overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're trying to figure out, how do I live in this world in my mind of all of these stimuli that continue to rattle my brain, and I don't have control over the external stimuli, and my brain is having a hard time trying to process and organize what's going on out there. But they tend to be very, very vigilant in what they are observing around them. And if you look at the different characters, each one of them, when they planned something, a criminal event, it was very detailed.
Yes.
And they anticipated what was going to happen and how they were going to set a trap or be prepared for how they were going to be able to respond or ultimately try to kill Batman or the cops or whatever. But it was very, very detailed. So I think that what their superpower is just this power. In fact, I don't know if you'd call it's a power of observation, but it's one that is kind of not really controlled. So they're also hypersensitive. If they hear something or something going on around them, they tend to also relate that to them.
Yes.
If you're walking down the street and somebody says, that asshole, and they're talking about somebody that's walking by, or they're talking on the phone to somebody, oftentimes a person that is hyper observant may hear that asshole and think that, why are you talking about me?
Me? Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're constantly hearing, and what happens is your amygdala, or the part of your brain that really is kind of the thing that focuses on key things.
Yes.
Like you bought a blue car. Now you see everybody's got a blue car, but before that you thought everybody had a red car. It's the same thing that's going on in your brain in terms of picking up things that tend to reinforce whatever you're thinking about, or whatever your conscious and subconscious or unconscious is focused on.
Yeah.
So now you've got all of this negative input that is not directed at you, but you're bringing it in and filtering it as though it is. And you're going through your life just building up, this mountain of shit that you're picking up that most times isn't even relevant to you.
Right.
But you're taking it internally, and then you're going to address life in a way that is dramatically affected by that. So, they are also, because of that, they're very good at manipulation and very good at intimidation, because they can pick up these triggers that they may use and see how a person responds. And if they observe that person was really affected by it, then they can dig deeper. Or they can understand better, how am I going to try and influence or manipulate, or eventually, take this person out, if that's what they were trying to do. So that was kind of what my thought was in terms of the superpower and kind of the tool, is that they tend to look at everything in life with a magnifying glass, and that just becomes super overwhelming and kind of drives you deeper into a depression, because there's just way too much that's overwhelming your ability to function normally in society.
I actually agree with you on that. I think that, so we're living in a pandemic right now, and everybody's afraid to go outside or whatever. And then you have the people that aren't, and let's just go with the fear right now. Okay. When you see a person on the side of the road that's homeless in that, it's because of this, we're not handing off money. We're not taking care like we used to and all that, because we have this idea from the pandemic not to do something. We can't touch them. We can't this, we can't that. They're dirty. The same thing goes with people with mental illness. Like how many times have you been walking and a homeless person says, "Hey, I'm a vet," and they want to get, like, can you spare some change? It's almost like a thing that people have heard so much that they just ignore it. But the truth is, more veterans have committed suicide in our country. This is an actual fact. More veterans have committed suicide in our country after battle than men who have died in battle in the last 30 years.
By far, yeah.
And it's ridiculous. So we can't just think like, oh, that doesn't mean they're really mentally ill. That doesn't mean they were a veteran. That doesn't mean this. It's each person's individual. And when the Joker, who is, like you said, you feel things around you and all that, he's perceptive of what's going on around him. Mm-hmm. For him being a perceptive being, for him seeing those things, it doesn't mean he's interpreting it, but he can feel the hate all around him. He can feel the anger all around him. And then he turns around and it comes out of him in a way that is not appropriate. And for, I think, a lot of mentally ill people, that's really what it is they feel all of that negativity around them. It's being super sensitive. I'll give you a good example of who I am. I could sit at a restaurant with you, Brett, and you and I are drinking coffee, okay? And we're just talking at breakfast, and there's 6 tables around us, okay? I could tell you what every single one of those tables is talking about without even, and you and I are in a conversation because I can hear. Right. And it's not that I'm not listening to you. I'm in our conversation. I can just hear it. What's interesting was I showed my dad once. Him and I were at breakfast, and I showed him all of those tables were complaining. All of them had something they were mad at. All of them had something they were, and I'm like, that is where it bothers me, is because imagine knowing you can hear all these things from all these places, and then you're feeling it on you. Like, that is what is so draining. We don't realize how much energy we put out in this universe that might not be what we want. Sorry, go ahead. I see you ready. Jump on me.
No, I think that's absolutely a great segue into kind of what I was going to say next. And that is, have you ever had Reiki sessions?
Oh, I love Reiki. I have my bracelet. I do Reiki once every couple weeks. I just did my first, I forget the name of it, but it was like a foot bath. And you sit there for a half hour and it detoxifies your body and pulls things out. Brett, I've never done anything like this, and I've had pedicures, so I know what warm water feels like and how your feet feel good afterwards. No, the water was like a dark brown. Uh-huh. And she looked at me and she goes, "Do you smoke cigarettes?" And I'm like, "No, I don't smoke any tobacco, just weed." And she's like, "That wouldn't do this. And we're going through some things. I will be 100% honest. I've never felt my body feel like it pulled things out. And it wasn't a mental thing. It wasn't a thing like that. I was purposely sitting there challenging it in my head going, this isn't really going to feel any different. This isn't going to, by the time I was done and I'm drying my feet off, I felt the energy in me change. It's
Right.
like the Healy with you.
Yeah.
If I text you and say, hey, I'm out of alignment, I really could use a Healy, I know when you're doing it. And it's fascinating to me because I can feel my energy change no matter how bad it gets.
Well, and what I was really trying to bring out here is, this superpower of being, super observant, um, is, and it being used in this villainous way with the Joker, is also used in a very positive way by energy workers, by Reiki workers, and the other thing that those energy and sensitive people have is they have to be very conscious of cleansing their bodies because they're constantly receiving this energy, like you were talking about, listening and hearing the stuff that's going on the tables. They feel that energy. My girlfriend, especially with all of this isolation due to COVID, when she gets into a crowd now, she's feeling this energy much more intensely than she did before, because she had already kind of, in a normal world where you're always around a group of people or walking through, places with lots of people, had kind of already a natural way of sheltering or at least not being affected as much by the energy. But in today's world, they are being affected by this energy because they're not always in contact. And then there's more negativity in the world today than there was before COVID. I mean, everybody is in, well, some level of fear or concern or rejection or denial. I'm more of a, kind of toward the rejection of this being so awfully different than the flu,
Yeah.
and that it's going to, that, but let's not go there.
I was like, hold on, let's just skip this COVID shit. Like, we both know that could go different ways. And we both agree on a lot of these things.
So let me bring up something from one of the guys who actually wrote some of the Batman series, including being a part of the Dark Knight. His name is Grant Morrison, and he produced actually some of the best Batman stories. But one of the things that he was talking about is, is the Joker a representation or have some level of insanity? And he comes out and says, maybe it's actually the opposite of insanity. It is super sanity.
Ooh, go on.
And he defined that as a brilliant new modification of human perception. The Joker seems to have no control over sensory information he's receiving from the outside world, what we were just talking about. He can only cope with the chaotic barrage of input by going with the flow. That's why some days he's a mischievous clown, others a psychopathic killer. He has no real personality. He creates himself each day.
Wow. That's deep. That's really deep when you think about what he's saying there. Give me your thoughts, because I'm still processing all that. Like, I'm wanting you to send that to me so I can read it and really process it later.
Right. So to me, that's really describing some of what we had just been talking about. There is so much sensory events going on around us, billions of bytes of things that are coming into us through all of our senses every single moment that we're alive. And it's only through filters and clumping and things along those lines that our brains can work with all of that stimuli. And we choose and build belief systems and things that become our filters, so that when we get and hear certain things, we clump them together. We organize them into this directory or this folder, or, and then we're able to deal with it. We're able to live life because we've been able to kind of compartmentalize. And when I say that, I'm not saying compartmentalize and hide it, but put it into a specific folder. And because it's in that folder, now I know how to respond to it. I've responded to things similar to that, so I don't have to look at it as a brand new event. When people don't have that ability to file like this, each and every stimuli that comes at them is like a new thing that they have to process and figure out, how am I going to respond to that? And then they just become so overwhelmed. And then eventually they may come out in a very, what we would consider maniacal or very disjointed way of being able to look at the reality of what's going on around them.
I agree 100%.
And this concept of super sanity is like totally being in the moment to the point, well, in the moment of receiving all this stuff, which can take them out of the moment in terms of where they're going with all this stuff, because their mind is constantly like this. Yeah,
that's me.
Well, and you know that this is why this superpower of the villain is also a superpower of a hero.
Correct. Go on, because like I said, I'm processing my thoughts still.
So going back to like my military training, you know, and I'm talking about this hyper awareness or hyper observant. In the military, you're trained to be vigilant. You're trained to have super attention to detail. You're trained to have situational awareness. Always have your head on a swivel. Know what's going on around you. Check six. Always check your back. Know what's going on behind you. Keep an eye on those things. You've probably heard or used the term "keep your eye on the ball." You know, what does that really talk about? It could be like in a baseball context where you watch the ball, or it could be in a carrier landing. They actually use a ball to be able to judge where the ship is going up and down in order for them to land on the carrier. All of these things are about being hyper observant. So we're training leaders, we appreciate the value of this kind of observant or power of observation. But that's again kind of where people can put all these things into a folder and be able to process them. When you don't have that folder structure, that's when it can turn into more of what happens with the Joker or potentially mental illness, because you just don't have the folders. And then you can't, each time you have to try to figure out how to deal with a particular situation. If a pilot that was trying to land on a carrier every time had to learn how or relearn how to land on the carrier, they would never do it. They would be dead probably in the first, if they get past the first one because they were lucky. The chances of it happening the second time are about nil. So it's all about being able to kind of structure things in a way that your brain can process them and help you to live your life in a world of billions of bytes of information and stimuli hitting you all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. With the Joker, I think it's a perfect example because all of them connect because the Joker ends up having a following through all of them. But with the Joaquin Phoenix one at the end, when he like you said, that he pictured it in his head, he was sitting in his living room, practicing what he was going to do and say. He wanted to make that type of impact and put it there so he could get it out. But what was interesting is how when he got out there, and he did this, and it created that outlash of people. It was pretty fascinating to me, the amount of people that just followed. And it's when you feel those emotions and you feel that energy all around you, whether it is the good or the bad, it's how you take it to lead. And the Joker took that as a way to lead because he saw under the microscope, like you were saying, everything everybody else is feeling. He saw it, he felt it, he understood it. And then he turns around, and when he does something, a lot of people connected with that to be like, oh, boom. And in the movie, they showed the street was full of people. It looked like Cleveland won a championship. That's how full of people it was. Like, right? And it shows that with all these energies, all of us, your energy, my energy, all of it, they flow in their own ways. You ever walk in a room and you feel like your significant other, your mom, your whoever are angry at you and you don't know why and you have no idea what's going on, but you can tell right away something's off.
Absolutely.
That's the energy we're talking about. Now imagine being able to feel that everywhere you go. It's a totally different thing. It's a totally different vibe. And then you turn around, and when they let that energy out, like they did in these movies, it becomes a negative, and people associated then it good as bad. Technically, if we wanted to twist this, Batman, his parents are killed in front of him, and then he turns around, and instead of becoming a negative, like Joker type thing, he's the hero that saves the city. But the truth is, he went through an angry time there. He went through problems, but we glorified it because he went and put the bad guys in jail. But look at what the Joker's doing. He led a revolution, and I'm not saying it was a good thing. He leads a revolution towards people being able to break free from a tyranny that everybody was relating to at that moment.
Well, interesting that you say that, because I as I watch these movies, and I do, watch these movies, in this case, I'd never watched some of these Batman movies or Joker movies. And when I did, that to me, it's very intense, very scary even. So that's why sometimes I don't watch them. But as I'm watching them, I'm like, I need to do this because there's a completely different world out there that I may not be aware of, and I need to be aware of. But one of the things that came out of the movie with Jack Nicholson is that Vicky Vale was kind of this reporter kind of person. She was Kim Basinger. In the movie. She was talking to Bruce Wayne or Batman. I can't remember which one of those two, but in reference to the Joker and Batman, I think it was Batman. And he says, in reference to the Joker, he's psychotic. And she comes back to him and says, some people say the same thing about you.
That's a great point. Yeah.
That is, kind of going where you were talking about that thing. And, some other things that came out of that particular movie was, my smile is only skin deep. Inside I weep. And that's super intense when you think about, what's driving these characters. Actually, they're oftentimes very sad. And they feel like they're in a lot of cases, as they're starting, especially, and you saw this in the movies as well, where they, like Joaquin Phoenix felt that he was not even really acknowledged. He didn't have the significance, a real significance to his life, a reason for being. And, he kind of got that to attention to a certain degree when he was being a clown.
Mm-hmm.
But then he continued to do things. And you remember when he was on the train and he killed those guys because they were, first of all, teasing someone else, and then they came after him. And then that appeared as headlines in the newspaper, right? And he says something like, oh gosh, what was that line? It was along the lines, crap. It was basically, nobody really paid attention to me, but now they are. And they didn't know it was him, but he knew it was me. So when he saw those headlines, it was like, I'm significant. People are recognizing me for what I did, even though what he did, was terrible. That was part of it. And one of the lines that he had in there in the movie was the worst part about, and this is from his notebook. You remember he used to have a notebook at the very beginning?
Yes.
So in the notebook, he wrote, the worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't.
Yeah, I remember that quote. What movie is that one in?
That one is actually in the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix.
Yes. Okay. That's right. I was trying to remember which one it
You know,
was
because he used to go and he'd watch comedians and write down jokes and, you know, like what did the crazy man say to the straitjacket? Loosen up. You
I
know,
forgot that one.
why are poor people always confused? Because they don't make any sense, like CENTS.
Yep.
So um, these are the types of things that oftentimes we remember and joke around in the normal world, but in a different world, like the world of the Joker, they take these things in a different light. And you saw just how he really relished wanting to have more love in his life, and he imagined what's his name, that TV character, that the Murray Franklin show.
I don't know that show.
Well, he was, that was in the movie, the Murray Franklin show. That was
Oh, the movie. Okay, I was trying to picture like an actual show name. That I was like, wait, what?
No, in the show, you know, he actually dreamed of being able to be on stage and hug Murray, and Murray be like his father figure and a loving, caring father figure. And then Murray gets this video of the Joker, or Joaquin, Arthur, I should say, up on stage the first time he tries to be a comedian, and he breaks out into that laughter of his. He had a mental disorder, which was very similar to like Tourette's. So when it became an intense situation, he broke out into this maniacal, uncontrollable laughter. Right? That's what.
Yeah.
So that's very much like Tourette's. Something triggers it, and then you can become very embarrassed by it. You know it's happening, but you can't control it happening. And then people are making fun of you, and that goes on throughout your entire life. So Murray brings this video up and starts making fun of it. So now this character that Arthur was looking at as a father figure, and he and his mother used to watch the show like every night together. All of a sudden he's making fun of him, and he starts to really shrink and go into a depression. And then over the course of time, then he gets invited onto the show. And then he starts this detailed planning of how he's going to potentially, off Murray on the show. Right.
Yep.
So then it goes into again, that very observant, very detailed, imagination of what is going to transpire and how I'm going to do it, and actually, virtually playing it out in his mind, just like they teach Olympic athletes to vision their entire run down a ski slope or their race or whatever. He was doing that same thing in his mind with regard to what he was going to do to Murray, who now his father figure basically rejecting him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that it led to his break, like where he finally knew I shouldn't say finally knew. It led to him knowing that his pain was there and he was going to react on it. It influenced him making an action happen.
And being able to kind of start to take control of his life.
Yeah.
By eliminating things that he didn't like in his life, or people that he didn't like, or types of people, or things along those lines. So these are things that are honestly going on in normal people's minds too. I mean, normal people are like, yeah, man, that son of a bitch should be dead, but they don't act on it, right? They talk about it. Sometimes they incite others to do it.
Yes.
Or they incite others about it and get them excited about it and get them to buy into it. And then they feel more significant because, yeah, the way I'm feeling about this dude is the same way that now these other people are. They really see my point of view. So that makes them feel more significant, but it's a significance that is in more of a negative sense or connotation in terms of the value to the world. But it is something that is one of the 6 human needs of humans, is to have a significance, a reason for being, a reason that people pay attention to you. And that can come in both positive and negative ways. And ultimately, the Joker kind of took it into negative ways, but it happens every day with people, and especially, you know, as you describe, even with bipolar, oftentimes that is something that comes into mind, and can be taken, you know, especially if you're on a down cycle, it becomes very traumatic. And if you don't have control over it, there's serious consequences in terms of potentially actions or reactions that you might have at that time.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Because you might react differently because of the fact you're overly emotional. You might be in a I tell Sarah, I wake up and I can tell her what kind of day I'm going to have just by the way I wake up. And it's taken years for me to get to this, just so I'm clear. I literally can wake up, and if Sarah says something and just the tone of what she's saying, it could set me off. And if I see that it's something where I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Shut up. No, that's not what it is. And when we get into a fight, it's unnecessary. And that's my own thing. We just woke up. We're both still getting out of bed, but it means that my mindset didn't wake up in the right place. Even if we're disagreeing on it, the fact that I got so quickly triggered was not a helpful thing, was not a healthy thing. It's
Well, yeah, it goes along with, you know, kind of, you know, there's an internal conflict that we all have going on within us. And, you know, which one comes out in our energy, which one comes out in our actions, is something that most of us can control. Some of us don't or can't. There are chemical imbalances and hormonal imbalances that affect people, that then make their ability to control or restrain or refrain from doing something much different than somebody who doesn't have that same level of chemical imbalance or neurological disorder or whatever it happens to be. You know, and that's oftentimes why people that have disorders of some sort, they're trying to control their situation. They may recognize that they have this thing, and they may go into their own kind of self-isolation. Like if you have Tourette's, you're trying to avoid embarrassment because people are making fun of you, and, you know, you make a funny noise that you can't control, but others, you know, like you're in a library or something, and all of a sudden you make some really loud noises, and people just look at you like, what the heck is your problem? And then it goes from what is your problem to either I'm intimidated by you or get the fuck out of here, you know, that type of thing, right? And
quickly
they have no control over it, so they start to isolate, and then what they're trying to do is they're trying to gain control of their life, gain control of their surroundings, create their own world, their own safe place. Mm-hmm. But as they start to disassociate more and more, they also, you know, their mind kind of goes in different places too. And depending on what they're feeding their mind and how they're processing it, that can very much go to a dark side, because they feel that embarrassment, harassment, negativity, from things that are happening that they may not have a lot of control over. So they become, you know, their hypersensitivity or hyper observation turns things again into reinforcing the dark side.
I agree.
So
I think it's also, I think, so you use the word microscope, and then this will be my last point, because we've gone for over an hour already. That's how good this conversation went. Using the microscope, don't use it towards others. Use it on yourself. Looking inward is, at least this is my interpretation. Because if you look at yourself, you'll see whether you're in that mindset of the go fuck yourself, or the, you know, this isn't an issue I need to be getting into right now. This isn't an issue I need to be thinking about. So when you have a situation come about, using the microscope to look at yourself before you look at others, I think is a good way of looking at this tool. What are your opinions on it? How do you interpret that?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's a microscope or a magnifying glass, what I think is even more important, and the way that you can potentially really help yourself in this tool is in the power of observation, but to be able to pull yourself out of being looking at yourself from the inside out to again being the person holding the magnifying glass and looking at you.
Yes.
That enables you to kind of get a different perception or perspective on what you're thinking, and then how to react as looking at it from an outsider into you, as opposed to yourself trying to self-evaluate. When you try to self-evaluate from the inside out, everything that's in you is affecting your observation. If you can
Correct.
pull yourself out to be an observer, or in some cases what they say is, if you're an observer, you're actually part of the situation. You need to be an observer of the observer in order to really have the disassociation necessary to evaluate what's really happening and not influence what's happening by your observation, right?
Correct.
I mean, it gets really freaking deep in that kind of that thought process, but really it is being able to breathe, create in your mind or in your physical environment a safe place, and then step back, kind of an out of body experience, and look at what you're doing. And this doesn't have to take a long time. This can be, in seconds, but it's a matter of you being able to train yourself to be able to get there quickly and say, is this how I really want to react?
Mm-hmm.
Is this really what's being said? And when I'm doing this, I'm saying, breathe, breathe. And now, okay, is this really what was intended? And look at it from that outside in. And that can help you to really bring things into a perspective, or help you to file it in a constructive way that you can then deal with it and respond in a way that is not going to continue to create more stress in you and others, or bring you back down to a more steady state.
I agree.
There's times for high and there's times for lows. And, the people that have the best relationships, oftentimes they say, are those that have tremendous highs, but oftentimes those same people have tremendous lows. And the worst thing that can happen is if both you and your significant other are on your tremendous highs together, that's great. But when you're on your tremendous lows together,
it's where you find how much you love each other. Because that's really where the challenges come, because anybody can be there when the things are going great and you're on a high. It's when you're at a low. It's when, I'm going to use just me because I don't want to put words in anybody else's mouth. It's when I'm at a really big low and having a depressive day. It's when I say I can't be around people who are depressed, or I can't hear about the negative stuff everybody else is doing, it's because I'm going to keep going down a negative path. Having a partner that can balance that is essential. And when they're having a low day too, it takes both sides to talk things out and not be pushing towards having theirs be more than the other person's. It's understanding both and giving that respectful boundaries.
Right. And that's where also having some level of a support group, because oftentimes you're just so close to a situation with your significant other that it's difficult to address those things, or to disassociate enough from it to be able to kind of bring yourself out of that depressed state. And having somebody else in your support group that you can reach out to, or and that support group doesn't necessarily have to be an individual. It could be a recording of Tony Robbins or somebody. It could be watching the Three Stooges, or something along those lines. But it's you recognizing where you are in your energy, and then finding that opposite energy to be able to help you to bring you back up, so that it's not going to continue to spiral down. The death spiral to me is in your mind. It's in, instead of building, like they say, to success. You're actually digging your way
Hmm.
to.
That's an interesting way of putting it. So instead of building the steps and taking it one step at a time or one square at a time, it's your. I'm in a group chat that is going off. I'm sure you can hear that beeping. Like I muted it and they went to another group chat and I'm like, oh my God, I want to kill you people. So having. Sorry, that last, like, I was like, I just muted you. Like, what the hell? With people building themselves up one step at a time to get their best leadership is, I think the best thing would be for everybody to realize that you're walking a journey, you're working on yourself and seeing what others people's are. It's understanding that you may know the path you're on, but that doesn't mean the person that's saying, go fuck off, does. That doesn't mean they know their path. And being more understanding, letting go of your own ideas of what they should be doing and being there for people. I think once people are more open and understanding and loving, it really makes a big difference, because then you're going to see less jokers and you're going to see more people trying to be able to be themselves and open up because they feel more comfortable knowing who they are. That's just my opinion.
I agree with you 100%. I think that's not the direction that we tend to see things, especially if we watch the news and that kind of stuff. And that tends to reinforce whatever I would say that the news tends to reinforce whatever negativity is going on within you, because most of the time the news is pretty negative. And you need to be able to recognize that isn't necessarily you, that the environment, and I'll tell from my own perspective, this whole thing about COVID it's not that I don't mind being alone. That's just part of my natural energy, but not being able to be around people in crowds, because I don't always interact with them. I observe them a lot, and you don't get a chance to do that. So everything is fed to you, and you don't get a chance to oftentimes see the other side of the energy, the other side of the story. When you're walking down the strip, you can either run into people that just lost $1,000 and they're pissed off and mad, or you got the people that just won $2,000 and they're happy and go lucky, and they're here for Vegas and having fun. So being able to have the highs and the lows around you is very important, and it's really a lot got to do with what you're perceiving, the energy that you're emitting, because again, kind of like last week when we talked about magnets, you tend to attract actually the energy that you are emitting. But then at the same time, you really kind of need to recognize that when you attract the same pole, positive, negative, that they tend to reject. So you need to look at things in those light. But I think that the Joker is an amazing character. I think that the energy and the superpower that we talked about here, of being hyper observant, or magnifying glass as a tool, is really important. And to also recognize that, just like in a superhero and their superpowers, depending on the perspective and the light in which you use those, can also be super, I don't know what you call it, super negative, super powers, but in a negative or opposite direction. And the same thing, I would venture to say in a lot of cases that when you talk about bad people, they're not bad people. They have bad actions. But depending on how those bad actions are received by others, and how that level of significance is or that need for significance in life is received by the person with the bad action, they may just continue to replicate that bad action or grow that bad action, because it continues to reinforce that significance
Yeah.
which is not a positive significance, it's a negative significance. And we have to be able to step back out of that, recognize that, and then turn it around so that we can take that same superpower and use it to the good.
I agree. I think it's funny. We talked about the magnet recent episode, and I went to the mall yesterday. Just needed to get out of the house. And in here was not happy, and that's why I needed to get out. But in here, I could feel like I was giving. I was out there doing something, and I walked into this pet store, and the two people working were both transgenders, switching genders, actually. It was interesting. Guy becoming a girl, girl becoming a guy. And the masks are there, but like you could see the girl had a better beard than me. And I was like, and it was one of these things where the conversation was so easy that before I left, and I was only there 3 minutes, right? They both said to me, they were like, you were the most non-judgmental, like loving person I've met. And it made me feel really good inside. And then the next day I did an interview for a mommy blog, and she was saying how she does it. I don't even see the energy that's starting to come out of me. I don't even notice it yet, but there's a good energy that people relate to, and it's going to be used in a good way. And she just kept talking about it. And it was just, those magnets are crucial, because the good with the bad and all that, I see the bad in me, but they saw the good.
Yeah.
And they were able to magnetize to that good, which makes me have to rethink the magnet up here. So, but I want to let you know, I loved this episode. This is like a great episode. You and I get along so well. I'm enjoying it. When are you back in Chicago? I know you're going to come back sometime soon.
Don't know at this point in time. There's the kind of the timeline and situation has changed a little bit because of just COVID and
life
kind of junk, but don't know. But I'm not afraid to travel, so there's always opportunities.
I'm going to be in Vegas in April, but I was going to see if you were there, if you were going to be in Chicago before that, maybe you and I meet up and stuff like that. I've never met Brett face to face other than digitally, and this has been, every time we get off, I feel great again inside, and it's you've taught me something. I take notes. I love where we're headed with this, and I think we have a lot of good things. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Brett Gordon with People Are Businesses Too.
Oh, opposite.
Businesses are people too.
Perfect.
Worst part is I said it in my head right, and I'm like, that's not right. Say it the other way.
That's Brandon. My dyslexia too, so.
People Are Businesses Too. Go give them a check out. I'm Brandon Croucher, the CEO of Delight Cafe CBD, the only odorless, colorless, tasteless CBD on the market. Brett, this has been a great one. Ladies and gentlemen, whether your superhero is Batman and the good, or the Joker and the evil, make sure to use your magnifying glass to be able to look inside and see which one you are. Brett, it's been a pleasure, my friend. I hope you have a great day, buddy. Thank you.
All right, take care. All right.
Thanks, buddy. Have a great one.
Bye now.